Quite a lot of you? Yeah, yeah. Sadly, no longer with us. Had a huge influence on me personally, which is that I had a friend called Pete Gurd, who was a very fine guitarist, whose sister was his girlfriend. And he used to teach Pete stuff and take us to folk clubs and let us play. So I'm enormously indebted to John Isherwood. And he promoted stuff. Carolyn Hester is one example, who was on BBC4 recently on a kind of revival of, you know, the early New York folk scene, and she's still performing and still playing. And that was at the Oddfellows Hall in Kingston Road. This is a photograph of where the railway used to be on the left-hand side. My explanation for the photograph here is, if I photographed where the railway was, there's just houses there. I couldn't resist the idea that Eric Clapton is in the distance with his guitar staring down the road. I just thought that was too good a photo opportunity to miss, really. And the railway, of course, wasn't just a folk club. It was a jazz club and a rock and roll club, and there's a history to be written about the railway, but it no longer exists. And there's the Talbot, and on the top floor there, the Talbot had a folk club. John Isherwood ran that. The first week he opened it, he put on Nadia Cattouse. Who, you say? 400 people turned up. Shut the doors. Extraordinary, vibrant folk scene in Portsmouth at that time. Star Inn in Lake Road was another one. There were lots and lots of social clubs that had folk clubs and folk events on. It was a remarkable time, really. Paul Simon played at the Talbot Hotel, I think in 1965, but I can't remember, but it's in there. He was paid 15 quid for the gig. Wonderful. Imagine that. Back to the beat groups. This is the Dynamos who we saw just now, looking in that kind of laid-back House of the Rising Sun style. But the mod thing, in a very broad sense, begins to influence look and sound as well. The mod thing begins to have a huge impact in Portsmouth around 1964. Kimball's in particular. The Concord Club in Southampton begins promoting people like Alexis Corner and Graham Bond there. Georgie Fame does a residency at Kimball's. Again, you know, if you think about Alexis Corner with Dick Hextall-Smith, Graham Bond with Dick Hextall-Smith, Georgie Fame, saxophones, organs, very popular on the local scene a lot of the time. And here's the Rampant. There's two things I like about this. One is that I want to say something about how much I like the piece of music I'm going to play you an extract from. The other is to say that they are dressed in this photograph exclusively by Shirt King.
I've got to get away from you, baby, in every way. My heart says nay, but I've got to get away, yeah, yeah.
That'll do, really, because the point I wanted to make is that at the time, I think that's pretty sophisticated, particularly that use of harmony and the fact that they've written the thing themselves. So they're moving away from that obsession with simply covering music from, you know, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, or whoever. And the mod influence grows. So Mark Tuddenham, who's been in about 4 bands already, and you've seen him before and haven't mentioned him, there he is at the top looking like a small face. And there's a kind of uniformity there because they're all wearing crew cuts and trousers, but there's this very clever, subtle shifting of the pastel colours. And Rod Watts, who's still about, still playing locally, organist. So again, the organ features as a kind of key element of popular music in Portsmouth. I can't resist 1 or 2 pictures with vans, because those of us who were in bands at the time, vans were very dear to us. They were very, very important things. And you notice that the Climax did what we all did, which is, first of all, they wrote the name of the band on the side, and then they went to Boots and bought lots of lipstick and pretended they were girls scrawling messages on it so that they looked really popular. We all did that. That's John Clark, who was at the Burns Guitar place. And I'm shifting quite quickly now. You know, I've shifted in terms of local bands through the kind of early mod influence into a kind of early psychedelic thing with satin shirts and, you know, not any longer necessarily matching clothes and so on. In Morgan's Camel Train. Mick Legg, the bass player on the right, a great friend of mine who I played with quite frequently. A typical kind of gig, youth club gig, Travis Romar. Again, these were people who went on into the bands like Coconut Mushroom and Tangerine Slide. And again, there's an organist in the band, but it's the sort of decor of the youth club that I liked, because, as I said, there are so few pictures with audience members in that wherever I got them, I wanted to use them. July 1968, Polydor Records came out. I was in the band. We went professional, went on the road, stayed together for at least 6 months with a series of extraordinarily unsuccessful gigs, sold 500 copies and split up. But it does give you a kind of indication of what bands around at that time, we were playing that kind of pop soul thing with saxophone and trumpet and so on. And I've always claimed to have been, at that time I wasn't a singer, I was the baritone saxophonist. I always claimed to have been the worst professional baritone saxophonist in the history of professional music. I think there's no question about that. There's no contest. You can barely see this, but it's really important. It's about the same time. It's a really important event that happened at the Guildhall called the Dance of Words, run by College of Technology students. So it's one of the first times in which students in Portsmouth begin to intervene in the popular music scene in a significant way. They took over the Guildhall. They didn't just take over the ground floor, but they took over all the adjacent rooms as well. And they had major poets, major British poets, I don't know, Mike Horowitz and Brian Patton and so on. Fairport Convention, very early in the days of Sandy Denny in Fairport. Free came with Alexis Corner. There were mime acts. There were all kinds of experimental things going on. And it was sort of early experimental psychedelic, if you like, Portsmouth's version of the 24-hour Technicolor Dream. It was that kind of thing. And it was a kind of key transitional moment in the history of Portsmouth popular music. And sorry? What year was that? That was 1968. It was, I think it was May 1968, but it's in the book. I've written quite a lot about it in the book, yeah. And at the same time, the groups begin to pick up on all this psychedelic stuff. And, I mean, one of the very influential groups, which may surprise some people in some ways, one of the very influential groups in Portsmouth at the time was Love, Arthur Lee and Love. And Spinner used to write about them every week. And many of the groups, including the one I was in and Coconut Mushroom and Heaven and so on, were influenced by that kind of West Coast experimental sound. And there was a massive shift again at that time. And partly you can see it in the way that people look, but also in the way that they dress. What you notice about Coconut Mushroom is that they're terribly smart, nice-looking kind of psychedelic people, as opposed to that scruffy lot, some of whom are here today, which is why I'm saying it. I thought they were great. I really, really liked Heaven. They were always one of my favourite groups locally, and this is them.
To job on your father's land. Happy to be here, one step closer to your tender hand. Only a gardener could it be harder to reach your pedestal high.
And one of the things I wanted to say was subject matter, the gardener. So it's rural, and it's all that kind of hobbits and dreamlike stuff and so on. And that's me in the band after Harlem Speakeasy. So Rosemary, named after a herb, picture suddenly taken with trees behind it. You have to guess which one I am. I won't admit a thing. And that's one of the guys that I played with in the band, who's probably the most talented musician I've ever played with in my life. You just turn up with some new instrument and he'd play it. Used to infuriate the hell out of me because I've still not quite mastered E minor 7th on a guitar, let alone anything else. But John Little would play organ and 9-string guitar and violin and sitar and everything else as well. The other thing, of course, was that we would have photographs taken with those kind of lenses that made everything look slightly psychedelic. So that was a part of the image as well. Now, I nearly have finished. I don't think they ever ended. I don't believe all this stuff. Cultural commentators have argued for years and years and years that the Manson murders or the Altamont death, in the Rolling Stones concert brought all that stuff to an end. Well, I think it only brought all that stuff to an end if you didn't really believe in it very strongly, and I did believe in it very strongly, so for me it never finished. Sometimes it was very hard to keep believing in that stuff and to keep making it happen and so on, but I don't believe this kind of commercial exploitation of the idea that it finished. And I don't even believe it and I do apologise that I've done this to you, Celia, but I don't believe that it has anything to do with the ends of buildings, the birdcage, rendezvous, tricorn, or anything else. And I won't play this track, but it happens to be the single that Rosemary made that never got released in the end, and that's the chorus. I didn't know when we wrote that chorus that they were going to knock down all those clubs. I didn't know that, but I still think it's the truth. And I think that one of the things we have to do, and this is a complete coincidence really, the Art College recently celebrated its centenary, and to illustrate social life, they had a picture of me singing at the Art College in 1969, and I walked in there and my wife took that picture of me alongside me singing in 1969. And one of the things that absorbs me increasingly as I reach my 60s is the idea that I want to reflect on all that stuff in the 60s that mattered. Not just the fun, but all the serious stuff that actually changed the way I think about the world and understand the world. And as I reach my 60s, I've got a bit more time and space to do that reflective activity. And I'm kind of interested in the idea that that might be the project for the third stage of my life. So when I called this Here Come the 60s, it had two meanings. It wasn't just about nostalgia. It was about what all that meant. And if it meant anything that was worth anything, it's worth sticking with now and working through it now. That's a very important part of it for me. And I'd like to thank you very much for sharing it with me. Thank you. Okay.